Chair of the Commission on the Status of Women, Secretary General of the United Nations, President of the General Assembly, Chairperson of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences, ministers, permanent representatives of the missions to the United Nations, all our colleagues and partners online, ladies and gentlemen. On the 9th of March 2020, the 64th Commission on the Status of Women proactively took precautions and scaled down the session. 2 days later, on the 11th of March, WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic. Our lives changed from then onwards. 1 year on, we know just how hard COVID-19 effects have been on those who are already living in difficult situations. Its toll sparking fears of a further mental health epidemic. The pandemic has been especially hard on women and girls. This is the most discriminatory crisis we've ever experienced. It has hit hardest those who are least able to cope. It has posed a direct challenge to our work as the United Nations and the work of UN Women. The gains we have made in the past are at risk. Emerging from the crisis, we are facing more orphans and child-headed homes. Following school closures, there are 10 million more girls this decade anticipated to be at risk of child marriage and girls permanently dropping out of school because of pregnancy, in the main from non-consensual sex. We are facing the burden of unpaid care that is mostly and increasingly borne by women, with 59% of the women reporting having to spend even more time on unpaid domestic work since the pandemic. We are facing job losses. 2/3 of the jobs lost being the jobs that belonged to women. And those that are mostly affected are young women who are in the ages where they are rearing young children. 47 million women this year will be pushed into living on less than $190 per day, and with younger women again bearing the brunt of loss of income and lack of decent work. In addition, we face the digital gap that leaves women unprepared for the future. Excellencies, young women are under siege from gender-based violence. WHO's latest report on gender-based violence shows the highest rates of intimate partner violence in the past 12 months being against young women aged between 15 and 24. Throughout 2020, UN Women has raised the alarm. We have provided policy recommendations on both the shadow pandemic of reported increased violence at home during lockdowns and the disproportionate economic impact on the women that limits their options for recovery. This is creating legions of women and girls who live with trauma, possibly for a lifetime. The SG's report for this session underlines that violence against women in public life is a major deterrent to their political participation, and it affects women of all ages, all ranks, and in every part of the world. These are women who shape policies, who can make decisions that positively change the lives of many, who can enable women in other sectors to thrive, to access justice, and indeed to accelerate gender equality. Underrepresentation of women is a factor in the slow progress in all aspects of gender equality. That is why This session is a defining moment for gender equality. At this session, you can propose agreed conclusions that take us forward. Your conclusions on this year's priority theme have the potential to stop regression, refocus priorities, and move the whole agenda forward by making sure that women are in the at the high table. It is inconceivable that we can address the situation that is faced in the main by women and solve the problems that women and girls face without the women themselves taking part in decision-making. We currently confront the two biggest challenges of our generation: the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences, and the unfolding climate change crisis. In both, women are disproportionately affected, and in neither are women appropriately represented as negotiators and policymakers. In a recent survey of COVID-19 task forces from 87 countries, we found that less than 5% of those task forces had gender parity in the composition of their membership. This gives men the self-imposed, impossible task of making the right decisions about women without the benefit of women's insight. And this needs to be set right without delay, or we stand to lose. As this year, November, there is the UN Climate Change Conference. It is more important than ever that we get this right, starting with delegations that are going to be participating in that important gathering, some of whom are currently do not include women. Other reports tell us that in key public sector, including those where women dominate, such as health, men continue to hold most of the position, as high as 70% of the positions. And of course, this also is marking change, no change from previous year. In the private sector, the situation is even worse. The stereotypes that men are more capable leaders persist, and this we also need to change. Closely connected to this is the fact that women remain deeply underrepresented in news media, both as editors controlling content and perspectives as a subject matter. Excellencies, in this session, you can make your impatience known. You can propel progress, which will translate into greater benefits for women and girls. We have encouragement from private sector, from civil society, and increasingly also from private sector. Civil society has been working very hard for this progress. We know that what needs to be done also requires political will. We also know what needs to be done to promote the women's role in public sector. Most important is to institute special measures like well-designed and effectively implemented gender quotas and targets. Leaders can set and meet parity that needs to be presented in all spheres of life. We know that this can happen. We now have 13 countries with gender equal cabinets, down from 14 countries, And this is something we can emulate because 13 is way too low. Our own Secretary General has decisively used his executive power to change the gender balance of leaders in the UN system. We currently see women in the UN holding 50% of the most senior positions. Excellencies, neither the pandemic nor the financial crisis deters us from making progress in the representation of women. In fact, quite the opposite. The pandemic shows us how much we need the change so that we can truly build back better. Representation of women in decision-making is the only way to build back better, in a gender-responsive manner, in an equitable manner, and in a greener manner. We know from the work of the Interparliamentary Union that change is possible. We today celebrate gains that we have made. In Estonia, the Prime Minister and President are both women. In Lithuania, the share of women in government went up from 8% to 43%. In Rwanda, women still lead the African regional charts with the largest share of women ministers at 54.8% and still leading also globally. In the United States, women in charge of ministerial portfolio rose from 17% in 2020 to 46% in 2021. In Nicaragua, women lead the region with 59% of ministries led by women. In Mongolia, they progressed from 6.7% of women ministers in 2020 to 18.8% in 2021. Excellencies, change is possible. Political will is critical in that respect. The premise of this year's priority theme is that it is not acceptable that institutions which are predominantly male-dominated decide on matters that affect women's lives and concerns the lives of all of humanity. In another governance situation, this would not be considered ethical for stakeholders to have little or no say in the decisions and policies that concern them. This session of the Commission gives us the tool to stimulate game-changing and much-needed concerted increase in women's representation through the agreed conclusion. And if we cannot achieve this in this year, where we face a challenge of our generation, I put it to you, Excellency, with respect. We will have to ask ourselves hard questions. What is the purpose of the Commission? The Commission is strong and its actions can be bold. Bold actions this year will strengthen the implementation of your 2020 political declaration of CSW 64. And it will also propel the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Global leaders at the high-level meeting on the 25th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women in October last year at the General Assembly made some calls urging us to make progress. The President of Georgia urged us to do more for women in the informal sector, as well as women in vulnerable employment, and to close the gender pay gap. The President of Ghana called on development of programs, plans, policies, and laws to promote gender equality. The German Chancellor recognized that women play an integral part of the state decision-making, and yet they are not involved as equals when those decisions are made. The President of China stressed the need to work hard to build a world in which women are free from discrimination. The Prime Minister of Tuvalu acknowledged the impact of tradition and norms which hinder progress. The Prime Minister of Canada urged that women in all their diversity must be placed at the heart of decision-making. So the bold steps of this august assembly can bring the wishes of these leaders into reality. There is also added support from Generation Equality and its Co-Action Coalition, which complements our intergovernmental process, such as this commission, as well as complementing our strategic plan. We have engaged more than 15 million people thus far. We have 90 Action Coalition leaders who are poised to make game-changing commitments that will be announced in Mexico and Paris. Generation Equality will aim to accelerate the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals and Beijing Platform for Action. We invite all of you to make commitments. Excellency, I urge you to take action to include young women in decision-making, especially those who are affected by age barriers when it comes to entry into the public office. We see them in the streets of the world leading movement and facing lethal force. These are leaders of today and tomorrow. Their indisputable capacity to lead has been demonstrated. We must make space for them so that they can take their rightful place. Let this be a defining CSW session of our time and in a time of crisis. It is my heartfelt hope that in this year, which is also my last year at UN Women, we can witness bold and strong moves that will propel us in a much stronger way to gender equality and will end discrimination against women and girls and empower all of us. It is in your hands. Thank you.